Cassie and I had been married for 5 years and dated for about 5 years before our wedding. You could say we'd been in love since childhood. I had been with a few girls before I started dating Cassie, but as far as I knew, she'd only been with one guy. Our marriage was going according to plan. We both worked and had saved enough to start searching for our first home. After that, we'd have kids. My career as a structural engineer was going well, and Cassie planned to stay home once we had children. Cassie was just as lovely as the day we first met. She had shoulder-length chestnut hair and a thick fringe that came down almost to her eyes. Her dark eyes sparkled when she laughed. She was only 5'3", but she seemed taller because of the way she carried herself. She had well-defined hips and a beautiful waist. As for me, I was pretty average, not much to talk about. I stood just under 6 feet and weighed a little less than 200 pounds. My best feature was probably that I still had a full head of hair. I jogged at least 3 times a week, so I stayed in good shape. Our sex life was great. Over the years, we tried almost everything and openly discussed what we each liked and disliked. I was satisfied with her sexual openness and assumed she felt the same about mine. Life was good. The future looked bright. It stayed bright, until we had a talk one night. Usually, when we go to bed, we do one of 2 things, have sex or go to sleep. We never lay in bed with the lights off, discussing personal matters. It was a routine we both seemed comfortable with. Now, I understand why it was a good policy. John, can we talk about something? What? Now. Can't it wait until tomorrow? She was silent for a moment. John, Clayton Brenner is in town for a few days. Would you mind if I see him while he's here? She had my full attention. Clayton Brenner was the only other guy Cassie had slept with besides me. Back in school, he was a real heartbreaker. His family had money, and Clayton always dressed well and drove a fancy car, while the rest of us struggled to keep our beat-up cars running. All the girls were drawn to him, and he had his pick. He'd date one girl for a few weeks, then drop her and move on to the next. The girls knew what he was doing, but they still thought they were special. Unfortunately, Cassie was one of those he used and discarded. He usually bragged about his conquests to the other guys, whom I realized were quite low class. He was also considered pretty good in bed, and as far as I know, none of the girls, including Cassie, ever complained about his behavior. Why are you asking me about this now? I just don't want to do anything you might not be comfortable with. Where? At the Deska in restaurant. Cassie, I really don't like Clayton Brenner. I know, but we were friends back in school. Cassie, you weren't his friend, you were just a notch on his belt. She didn't respond, and the silence became unbearable. When did he call you? Yesterday. Why are you telling me about this now? Another moment of silence followed, longer than the first. I'm not going to comment on either option. Do what you want. Let your conscience be your guide. I had always wanted to say that. I turned onto my side, facing away from her. For a while, everything was quiet, then I heard her quietly crying into her pillow. She had never done that before. I lay perfectly still, so she wouldn't notice I was still awake. She sobbed softly to herself for a long time before finally falling asleep. It was the longest night of my life. Why would she cry over my refusal to indulge her meeting with an ex-boyfriend? Why did she wait an entire day to tell me he was in town? Why did he even call her in the first place? Our conversation had been brief and not emotional enough to bring her to tears. I had missed something. There was something I didn't understand. I tossed and turned all night, trying to make sense of it. Of course, there was a simple solution to my dilemma. All I had to do was ask her. Had she already seen him? Why did she want to see him? Was she planning to sleep with him? Had she already slept with him? I was driving myself crazy. I knew I couldn't ask her any of these questions. Anything I learned would have to come from information she shared willingly, without me prompting her. I felt strongly about this and was determined not to take the easy way out. If she told me, that would be fine, but I wouldn't ask. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 5 in the morning. I got out of bed and quietly went to the bathroom to relieve myself. I was still thinking. I tried a few mental tricks to stop, but nothing worked. Before leaving the bathroom, I looked at the laundry basket. I slowly lifted the lid and peered inside. Moving a few items from the top, I found a pair of black silk panties and a black push-up bra. This was her special occasion lingerie. She wore it on birthdays, anniversaries, and other holidays that called for celebration. Special lingerie always meant special sex. Yesterday wasn't a special day. We didn't have special sex. I hadn't even seen her in that lingerie. There was only one thing left to do. I slowly brought her panties to my face. There were no signs of fluids or any evidence of sex on them. I sighed with relief but reminded myself that this didn't mean there wouldn't be any. All I knew for sure was that she had worn her black silk panties that day, and I had to assume she wore them for someone to admire her in them. That I carefully placed the bra and panties on the vanity by the sink. Trying not to make any noise, I got dressed and left the house. The Waffle House was always open. As I sat there, sipping my third cup of coffee, my mind was racing a million miles an hour. I pushed away my half-eaten plate of eggs and oatmeal, paid the bill, and had no idea what I'd do next. Emotions were raging inside me. First, I felt disappointment over my wife's infidelity. The second, and quickly growing, was a sense of revenge. Clayton Brenner made a mistake by calling my wife. He was a smooth talker and a cunning son of a gun. Just the thought of him intruding on the sanctity of my marriage made me furious. A woman never forgets her first lover, and since Clayton was handsome and wealthy, it made everything that much harder. Taking revenge on my wife was a different matter. I knew what Clayton was doing. I wasn't sure what Cassie had done. Intent and motivation meant a lot to me. If she had done something, I wanted to know her motivation and what she aimed to achieve. I didn't feel I could judge her until I knew more. On the other hand, I really didn't want to know more. I drove aimlessly around town for hours until it was time to go to work. In the end, I convinced myself that I didn't want to know what Cassie had or hadn't done. Knowing would impact our marriage regardless and might even destroy it. I was determined not to let her explain her actions, no matter how hard she tried, if she even tried. That I felt tired and depressed. I didn't want to go to work or anywhere else, for that matter. Cassie was already awake. I was sure she had found the bra and panties on the vanity by now. I tried to imagine what was going through her mind, but I couldn't. There was too much going on in my own head to think about what she might be thinking. Now she knew that I knew something had happened. I couldn't focus on work at the office. Around 10 o'clock, the phone rang. "John. It's Cassie." "Yes." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'm going to stay with my mother for a few days. Are you all right?" "How long is a few days?" "Around a week." "Is that okay?" "Sure. Call me when you're ready to come home." "Okay. Thanks." Another short pause followed. "John, I love you." I didn't respond. I quietly hung up, sat down in my office, and cried softly. For the first time in years that I spent the rest of the week on leave, using up some accumulated sick days. I knew I was about to do something foolish, but I wasn't sure what exactly. The most likely scenario I could imagine was that Cassie had gone to the motel restaurant to meet Clayton, then went to his room and had sex with him, just like old times. When she got home, she felt guilty and tried, in some way, to confess to me. She waited until we were in bed, thinking I'd take it a bit better then. The deed was already done, and she was trying to get some form of reluctant acceptance from me to justify or make up for her wrongdoing. I didn't give her an inch, and now she had a real problem. She knew that I knew she wasn't being completely honest, and she had no idea what to do next. Of course, I could be wrong. When I got home, I found the black lingerie in the trash bin in the garage. The next 2 days, I spent making myself even more miserable. I stayed in the house, replaying these damn mind games over and over. I felt that Cassie and I had a special relationship, and more than anything, I wanted to preserve it. Any confession from her would destroy the trust between us. Any questioning from my side would do the same. We were trapped. I was sure she wanted to confess everything to ease her guilt and was prepared to face the consequences. I no longer wanted her confession because I felt it would destroy our marriage. Cassie didn't realize the full gravity of the situation. Was she now a traitor, an adulteress, or just a housewife who made a mistake and regretted it? And what about Clayton? He was a skirt chaser who preyed on married women, feeling they were a sure thing because he'd had them before. He called my home, my sanctuary, to tempt my wife. It was easy to see where my anger should be directed. I planned to deal with part of my problem the next day, and I didn't care what the consequences might be. It wasn't hard to find out which room Clayton was in. I decided the simplest approach was best. I'd knock on his door, and when he opened it, I'd shoot that son of a gun. At that moment, I didn't care if I got caught or not. I wasn't planning on making a big show of it and thought that keeping a low profile, in and out, would go unnoticed. I settled on my Ruger .22 caliber. I figured 3 shots to the heart and 1 to the head would get the job done. I'm not a big fan of guns. I can't even remember the last time I used or cleaned my firearms. I didn't have many: a shotgun, a hunting rifle, a .38 caliber pistol, and my Ruger. The problem today was that I couldn't find the Ruger. I tried to figure out where I might have put it or if I had lent it to someone, but I couldn't remember. In the end, I just grabbed the Smith & Wesson and sped over to the Deska Inn. Well, the next step of my plan didn't go well either. When I arrived at the motel, I found the place swarming with police cars. I shoved the gun under the seat and got out of the car. Casually, I walked over to one of the officers. They were escorting a woman out of Clayton's room. She had a blanket draped over her shoulders, and a female officer was holding her by the shoulders. I was afraid to look. When they got closer, I recognized the woman. It was Susan Bradford, someone we knew. She and her husband, Barry, had graduated high school with us. They had moved to Reading so Barry could open a car dealership. It was sad to see Susan, but I was relieved it wasn't Cassie. Susan had also been one of Clayton's old conquests. As they put her in the car, I heard one of the officers say, "No, she locked herself in the bathroom. It took us forever to get her out. Looks like he was shot with a .22 Ruger." Soon after, they carried Clayton out in a body bag. I can't say I was too upset, but I had been looking forward to putting him there myself. Well, there are days when everything goes wrong. On the way home, I picked up a pizza and a pack of beer. I spent the rest of the week catching up on yard work and fixing things around the house. I didn't feel like going back to work, and now that my little adventure with Clayton was spoiled, I felt a wave of depression setting in. I kept a copy of the newspaper with the story of Clayton's death. The police had no clues or witnesses. When Cassie came home, the house was clean, and a simple dinner was set on the table. It was a pleasant homecoming, just modest smiles and a kiss on the cheek. We had dinner and chatted about how her mom and dad were doing. We both took care to avoid any controversial topics. I washed the dishes and brought her a cup of Earl Grey. She sat quietly, just staring at her fingers resting on her lap. Slowly, she lifted her head. "John, I need to explain to you that." "Cassie, I'd rather not right now, please. Maybe we can talk about it another time. It's been a rough week, and I'm really not ready. But please, just listen to me. Enjoy your tea." An awkward silence settled over us. I picked up the newspaper with the article about Clayton and handed it to her. She looked at me and silently read the paper. She put it down and looked back at me, as if expecting some kind of approval. I said nothing. I think I'll take a shower and head to bed early. I'm a bit tired from the trip. I haven't been sleeping well lately. I'll sleep on the couch. Good night. Good night, John. I watched her go up the stairs as I carried the cups to the kitchen. It seemed it would take time before everything returned to normal. 2 weeks later, I moved back into the bedroom. About 6 weeks after that, we started having sex again. It took 4 months for our relationship to approach a sense of normalcy. It would never be the same, but we were close. We no longer had late-night conversations. We never discussed the episode with Clayton. Cassie became pregnant. We were both happy. With a baby on the way, we needed a new car, a station wagon, of course. I visited Barry Bradford. He was in the process of divorcing Susan and didn't hold back from talking about it. It's a shame she locked herself in the bathroom and couldn't identify the shooter, I remarked. Ruger's sound muffled, but still she couldn't help but hear the gunshots. Barry gave me a strange look. I tried to figure out what I might have said wrong. Up until that moment, our conversation had been open and candid, and it felt like I'd tripped over my own words. John, none of the newspaper articles or TV reports mentioned she was locked in the bathroom. Well, I must have read it somewhere. I didn't want to tell him I had been at the crime scene. I have all the clippings and information about what happened, and it was never mentioned anywhere. The fact that a .22 Ruger was used was also never disclosed. The police kept that information confidential for the sake of the investigation. I don't remember, but I must have heard it somewhere. Barry looked at me for a long time, saying nothing. He knew that Cassie had also fallen for Clayton's charm. Heck, everyone knew the girls Clayton had been with because he bragged about each one. A wide grin appeared on Barry's face. John, I'm going to offer you the best deal on the best station wagon on this lot. Let's go pick one out. I assumed Barry had come to his own conclusion about how I knew that Susan was in the bathroom. He was wrong, but I saw no point in correcting him. In the end, Barry established his own Ford dealership, and I received generous discounts on a new car every 2 years for the rest of my life. Cassie and I have 2 wonderful daughters. Our marriage continued to grow stronger, despite one misstep. When we attended social gatherings, Cassie always made an effort to stay close to me. If, at any point during an event, an overly confident guy tried to flirt with her, she would come over, take my hand, and whisper in my ear, "It's time to go." I always knew what that meant. It happened often because Cassie had turned into a true femme fatale. She aged gracefully. Some of our regular hosts knew about this little quirk of hers and began to play along. When they saw Cassie and me leaving early, they'd start their own investigation to figure out which jerk had made a move so they could give him a hard time. It became a regular game within our circle. Our 20th high school reunion came around, and we went to Lancaster. It was like all reunions, filled with handshakes and a lot of small talk. Everything was going smoothly, and we were having a good time. As the evening was winding down, a well-dressed, polished woman approached our table. It was Janet Brenner, Clayton's widow. She walked over to us, extended her hand, and invited me to dance. I looked at Cassie, and she nodded, signaling that it was okay. It was a slow dance, and I made a great effort not to do anything inappropriate. The song ended, and we stayed standing on the dance floor. She faced me, holding both of my hands. Clayton had an electronic planner. When the police returned his belongings to me, the planner was still on. I don't know why they didn't keep it or at least read it. I read the entire thing, multiple times, and then I destroyed it. I've waited for this opportunity to thank you personally for making the last 12 years absolutely wonderful. My new husband is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and without you, it never would have been possible. I knew what she meant, and I didn't have the heart to tell her she was mistaken. I figured there was no harm in letting her believe her own story. I kept my best poker face and let her talk. I didn't know exactly what was in Clayton's planner, but it seemed she had pieced things together and decided I was the one who had freed her. She leaned in and gently kissed me on the cheek. I glanced back and saw Cassie watching closely. I escorted Janet back to her seat, and a large, intimidating man stood up. "John, this is my husband, Harold Stanton." "Harold, I'd like you to meet John Wagner." "John, it's great to finally meet you. Janet and I appreciate everything you've done for us." I thought my hand might turn blue from how hard he was squeezing it. "I'm glad to see things have worked out so well for you both. I hope you have many good years together." It sounded pretty lame, but I was at a loss for words. I smiled and gave a slight nod. Returning to our table, I noticed Cassie sitting with her head down, nervously fidgeting with her fingers on her knees. She always did that when she was nervous. When I sat down, she started to speak. I pressed my index finger and thumb together and slowly ran them over my lips. She gave me a gentle smile and said nothing more. We were both tired, and it was about a 2-hour drive back to Reading. There was some small talk about the evening's events, but nothing about Janet. We got home, checked on the kids, and went to bed. I turned off the light, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. Everything was quiet, but I knew she wasn't asleep. "John." "Yes." "What did Janet say to you?" "Janet told me that she and her new husband are very happy and that I should thank you on her behalf," I lied. The dark bedroom was completely silent. Cassie lay very still and quiet. I couldn't even hear her breathing. "Cassie." "Yes." "What the hell did you do with my Ruger?" "Good night, John."